welcome to your next 4 Caillou challenge called Human Readable Duration Format. For this one, it's similar to a previous challenge we did. Oh, that's my ranked up notification. Anyways, they give us seconds, a number of seconds, and then we sort of have to convert it into this output where you specify hours, minutes, seconds, because remember this value here can be quite large. And so we're going to take it from just seconds and put it in a new format where it can be even years. So we're going to sort of walk down from, well, here, let's look at the test cases. You'll see it down there. Consider some of these later tests, right? You got years, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. So you have those 5 units, and you should convert your output to that. Note that it's basically comma separated values, but not on the last one. Instead of a comma, they want you to use the word and. They throw you a little bit of a curveball there. And the other part of this is if the unit is only, if the count rather is only 1, then you should not have a plural word. You should have just hour. But if you have more than 1 for your count, then that unit receives the plural version of the word, which is just adding an S to it. So day goes to days, hour goes to hours, minute to minutes, second to seconds, year to years. Notice there's only 1 here, so we have year. The other catch is if any of these values are 0, you just simply don't print them. You withhold them from the output. So notice this one it doesn't say 0 years, 0 days, 1 hour, 1 minute, 2 seconds. It just omits those altogether. So I think that's everything you need to know. Feel free to read the rest. This is a good point. For simplicity, they just want you to treat every year as having 365 days, so you don't have to do anything special to account for leap years, and every day is 24 hours. Other than that, feel free to, you should read through this description on your own. I try to give you the overview, so I'm not reading to you. But then once you get that in, go ahead and start the challenge. I'm going to set mine up and then I'll go into my solution. Okay, so I hinted that we had a similar problem in the past and we used something called a time span to address that. And if you recall the time span struct, it has this static method. Let me get it for you. I'm under time span. And then in methods, we have from seconds. So if I go here, it'll show us how to use that. Maybe you even remember. That's great if you remember. But we're going to do something like this. Time span interval. I'm just going to copy this. Don't tab these. Put tabs between types in their variable names. Okay, just put a space in there. This doesn't even look good. But anyway. We'll start from there, and this will just basically make you the time span structure from seconds. So it does that lifting for us of getting from a glob of seconds to, if you look under the properties here, it'll give us days, hours, minutes, and seconds. We don't care about some of these finer resolutions like microseconds, milliseconds. We don't need that. But note that there's no years here, right? So we're going to have to work with the days to get a year value as well. And that's not hard to do, as you can imagine. But let's get some code in here. I'm going to do this. Let's call it, oh, that tab's awful. All right, I'll just call it TS. Time span from seconds. And our parameter was named seconds, so I can leave that. Good, so we have this time span thing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another class. It's going to be like time span, where it's going to hold those values for me, but I'm going to kind of expand it to include years as well. So I could do something like public class time span with years. So we'll have a constructor time span with years. And we're going to take some values, as you can imagine. And my strategy with this then is I want to take a time span, I'm going to kind of copy time span, but I'm not going to implement all of this features, I just like the idea of having buckets that hold years, days, hours, minutes, seconds. So I'm not going to implement any of these other things, but for our purposes, it's like kind of an extension of time span in a form that's really easy for me to use to solve this problem. That's what I'm going for here. So to that end, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a public, let's make it an integer array, right? It's going to have 5 values, those what I'm calling the bucket values. And I'll call it, let's call it units, time units. And we're going to initialize this new int array, and we're going to have to size it, right? It's going to be like this. I'm going to show you how we get the size. I'm going to add an enumeration that's going to kind of help us work with this array, how we index when we want years, if we want minutes, etc. And I'll use that enumeration to size this array because it'll have all 5 of the values I need in it. So I could do public enum, and let's call it time units. And then I'm going to put the 5 values in, and I'm also going to name them a little conveniently for my purposes here. You notice all these units are in lowercase letters, and I'm going to start with the base form, not the plural form. If I didn't care about kind of leveraging this enum for output, then I typically would write it like, years, days, etc. But for this, you'll see how it'll tie together in the end. I'm going to do something like this. And I believe by default that your first enum value defaults to 0, but you can explicitly set it here, and I'm just going to do that. But it should work the same even if you don't. Day, hour, minute, second. These would be the ones, right? And I want mine to start at value 0 because I'm going to index into an array with it. I wouldn't want it to be a negative value or go outside the bounds of the array. So now when I'm sizing my little time units bucket here, we can go in and sort of use that enumeration to get the size of 5 that we want. I mean, you could hard code it if you want, but then if you were to come back later and add a time unit or remove a time unit, then your code can break. So I'm going to do it like this, and plus it's instructional because I don't think we've used get values or get names from the enum class before. So if you want to see how that goes, you can come to the enum class, and let's get to our methods. Where is it? Okay, methods. And this is kind of cool if you didn't know about this. You got get names and get values. So the names were the year, day, hour, and the values are the 0, 1, 2, the integral values that they're sort of mapped to. That's what an enum is, right? It's kind of it's a convenient naming thing, but underneath the hood, it's just a bunch of numbers. It's, a bunch of integral values. So I'm going to use values. You could just as well use get names here. You know what I mean? They're the same count. Each name has a value. So use whatever one you like. I arbitrarily clicked on get values, and feel free to read about that. Retrieves. So notice you're getting an array, right? And then we know arrays have a length property, so we can use that. So the way you would do this then, we have enum get values, and you have to tell it though the enumeration that you're dealing with. So you use this type of, and then you use your enum's name, type of units. That way it can get an array loaded with that enum's values. And then finally, once I have that array, remember it returned an array, I should be able to say length. And that should size our units array properly. One integer value for each unit of measure. Okay, good. And so now in the constructor, you imagine, we'll take those 5 values. We're going to pass in int years, int days, int hours, int minutes, int seconds. And then inside, we'll sort of load those values in our array. And I'll show you how I do that, the indexing, in a minute, but you can imagine just the simple assignment's going to go something like this, right? 4, 5 days, hours, min, sec. Okay, so now we can use our, you can just put in, you can hard code these. You can just say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's fine. I'm just trying to show you, this is an educational series, so another way you could do it is you could say time units, years, or I called it year, remember? And then, remember, this is an enum. You can cast it to an int. You can just use this C style cast to get that to its integer value, which if I scroll up a little bit, you'll see is 0. And the next one's 1. These automatically increment by 1 unless you give them a specific value, but don't do that. We want them to go up by 1 because I'm using them in this way to index into the array. So I'll just replicate this for the other. It would be hour. It would be minute. And it would be second. So, yeah, it kind of looks nice. Year to years, etc. That's all we need with this. It's a really simple class, and you might say you're doing next to nothing in this class, and yeah, that's kind of the point. Again, make small, very focused classes. If you've heard of the SOLID principles, that's an acronym, all capitals, SOLID. The S in that is the single responsibility principle that applies to making classes. Classes should do one thing. That's it. That's all they need to do. In good software, you have a bunch of small classes that do one thing. It's really clear what they do, and they do it well. And that's sort of the idea. We've just stepped out the tiniest bit. We just took a time span, and we just took that tiny baby step next to, okay, now make it with years too. And this will achieve that for us. So with this class now, I can do, we can make a time span with years, which we call it, we'll call it time, equals new time span with years. And now remember, we can leverage our time span to get days, hours, and remember, time span didn't have years, so it's going to have it could possibly have a huge days count, 1,000 or more. So we'll take days divided by 365. It's that simple because the challenge told us that we didn't have to worry about leap years. And so how do you think you would get the days? You would go time span days. There's a catch here that I told you, because days can go above 365. I'm actually going to use modulo 365. I want all the years taken out. I don't want to get 1,000 days. I want a day count that's less than 365, because if it's 365 or higher, it should increment my my years column, right? That's why I'm doing this and not just days. And then finally we had TS hours, I think it was called, TS minutes, and TS seconds, something like that. We'll find out if I type those wrong. Okay, so now we've got a time span. We took a baby step. We've got years. We've got these 5 buckets with all of our values. Great. And so now, instead of cluttering anything that I've written already with extra logic, I'm going to make another class, kind of like how you would in real life. You have a bunch of, they wouldn't be in the same file necessarily, usually not, but I'm going to make another class to handle the formatting of the output. So I just have an integer array, but obviously I got to get it converted to these strings that are mostly comma separated, but also end with an and word and no comma. So let's just make another class for that is just focused on formatting the raw integer data. So to do that, I'm going to make a new class, and I'll call it, let's call it time formatter. Should be good. Public. And note that I'm going to make this a static class. I instantiated the time span with years class, so I didn't use a static class here because I intended to create an object of this. Remember, static is like turning off object-oriented programming. That's an oversimplified way that I explain it. So that's why I didn't use static there. But this one, I have no intention of making objects. It's just kind of a logical scope for holding some functionality. And I said time formatter. And we'll define the scope of this class. Then we'll make a public, better be static method, right? Because it's a static class. Public static string. And we'll say we can call this method, this static method, time to string. It's just going to convert our time span with years to a string. So it should take a time span with years, call it time. Okay, now so here's where the rest of the implementation will happen. So let's use some link here to take our time. We got these nice buckets, nice and organized, and sort of project that into a new string sequence. And hopefully when I phrase it like that, it jogs your memory and gives you some ideas. So let's start with time. We know time has a units array that's publicly available, right? And so with this, I'm going to transform it, and by that I mean I'm going to call select, which projects the elements of a collection into a new sequence. I have an array of integers. I want to go to an array of strings. And so what I have right now is a count, right? I'm thinking of each integer value in units as a count of years, a count of days, hours, but you can name this however you want. If you want to just use the letter N, that's fine. And if you remember, select has an overload where you can also include the index of the array, so 0, 1, 2, etc. as a parameter that you can work with, which is very handy in this case. So I've got each element value and I've got its associated index. With that information, we can start converting this. And I want it to be a string, and I'm going to use the $sign here because I'm going to inject some variable values into the string. And so I'll start by saying the count, right? Because all these start with, 2 minutes, 182. They're all going to start with that count, and then the unit's going to follow. So I'm going to use the count, I'm going to use the space, and now I want a unit in there as well. And so what I can do for that is since I have the index, right, I can sort of convert the index into time units. So if it's index 0, time units with value 0 comes out to the text year. And hopefully now you see why I did that. It's going to convert each element's index into its associated name, a numeration name, and I'm going to get that in string form. So then what this starts to look like is a count, a space, and a unit of time measure, which is exactly what I want, right? And then finally we're left with the point of handling this thing if it's plural or not. So let's do that as well. So on top of this, I'm going to say, because we got the base by default, but let's add an S whenever there's more than one. And how would you do that? Well, check. If count is greater than 1, add an S, else empty string, which means here add nothing, right? So that should handle that. And then the last part would be, here, let me kind of make this so it's readable. One last bit, remember, we don't want to include any data that has 0 as a value. So to remember, our filter and link is the where method. And so with where, each of these at this point, right, after select, we could see it transformed everything into a string, right? This is enclosed by double quotes. It's a string, so just generically I'll call my parameter string, but you could call it time or formatted time, or I don't know. I'm just going to call it string because it's a string. So where string, and what I'm going to do isn't maybe the best, but I'm going to just say, hey, look at that first character. Remember, it's this count value that's first. And since it's an integral value, it'll never have a leading 0, right? So what I'm going to do is say, hey, take that first character and make sure that it's greater than 0. Or you could probably even say not equal to 0. And so that will filter out. If we had 0 hours or 0 minutes or 0 years, this clause at the end here that we tacked on will filter those out, which is perfect, what we want. So I think that gets us where we want to be, and let's kind of store this in a result right now. Remember, these link methods are going to give us this collection and IEnumerable at this point of strings, which is good. We're going to end up joining them as we've done so many times. In fact, let's do that. Let's wrap this up in a string join, and we're going to separate them by commas. And I should need another closing parenthesis at the end to close this off. So now we have that same thing, but now each of these pairs are separated by commas, which is what we want. And actually I should put comma space, right? Because they always have a space after the comma. So that's good. It's mostly there, but we need now to get rid of the very last comma if necessary. If any comma is present, there, you could have like 1 second here where there's no commas at all. But if there is a comma, we want to take the last one and replace it with the word and then we should be done. So we got result. We could say int index. Let's find the index of the last comma. And to do that, you could say result. And if you look up the string class, you'll notice it has a method last index of. And we can pass it, in this case, we're looking for the last comma. So we'll do that. Now remember, it may not find something. And if you look at the documentation, this will return -1 if it doesn't find anything. So what we'll do then is say, if index is greater than -1, then we need to handle it. Otherwise, there's nothing to do. We'll say result. In that case, we have to modify it. And what we're going to do is say result. We're first going to remove the comma, and then we're going to insert the new text at the same point. So we'll say remove at position. And again, just open up the string class if you're not familiar with any of this, and you can read about these methods. But you know, they're well named. I think you can understand what they're doing. Remove at index, and then you have to tell it how many characters to take. Well, we're just taking a comma, so we'll just say 1. And then we're going to chain on to this. It's going to remove that comma, and then we want to insert right back at the same position. You can look up the insert method, and it's at the same index, and we're going to give it the text that we want, and it's going to be the word and now. So we remove the comma, inserted the text and in its place. And when you do that, you can finally return the result. And this will only fire if necessary. Now, let's see, I probably need some using. Let's get using system for time span, I think, and then using system link for those link methods. Let's run a test. I'm sure I typed something wrong. Okay, line 41, syntax error. Let's go down to 41. Oh, sure. Yeah, not a plus. Remember with the conditional ternary operator here, it's if true, do this, colon, and then your other case. So, yep, definitely a mistake. Line 6. Oh yeah, we didn't add our new feature. So finally, when we have our new time formatter class, we can just simply say return time formatter, and it should just be time. That's how we passed it in. So let's try this. You got to return something though, right? That's what the contract says. Line 10, non-invocable cannot be used like a method. Oh yeah, so that's the name of the class, right? The static class. Then we got to call its method, which was time to string. And that's how you access static methods with the class name. It doesn't work off the off an instance of an object because you can't create an object with a static class. So okay, good. Remember we had that edge case where seconds was 0, so let's handle that. If seconds equals to 0, or maybe we'll even make it less than. You could throw in an exception if it were less than 0, since that's outside of the rules of this challenge. We'll just say return now. That's what they told us to do. Okay, we got green, good. And we'll hit the attempt. All green. Yeah, so if you want to add some print statements here, you can, like one here might be good to list what the input value is and what time span days is, if you want to see how that isn't necessarily under 365. Maybe then you can believe what I said earlier about that. Or maybe it's helpful if you use some print statements in here if this is what tripped you up. But hopefully you can see, obviously when I submit this, there's going to be much more concise solutions than what I did. As usual, I'm trying to teach you how to break things out into small focus classes and kind of get you equipped to deal with real world situations, as opposed to writing cutesy one-liners, which won't get you so far in industry. So yeah, pretty easy strategy, right? Again, little steps. Time span goes to time span with years, with all these buckets, and nothing is, I don't have absurd values. I kind of enforce that. I make sure I don't have days counts over 365, stuff like that. And from there, I make this class, this new class that can handle the formatting. You know what I mean? They're kind of different interests, right? Like this is just sort of collecting the raw data and getting it in a convenient format. And then this class had the job of converting it into a string output and then doing any kind of cutesy formatting, like some department, it has to have all commas but no commas at the end, and I like the word and without a comma, people, and then they're gonna come back a week later and say someone else determined there should be a comma with the and it's nice when you separate all this stuff out, because when those kind of problems come up, then you go, hey, it's with the formatting. I just go over to formatter and handle business there, and I don't have to disrupt anything else. So that was kind of the idea here. I'm definitely not going to get any cool guide points for submitting this, but what can you do? I don't think I have any comments in here, so I'm going to submit it. Hopefully you found value in this, how you can kind of use enums this way. Maybe you hadn't seen this before. You can use get names and get values and index with stuff like that. A little more flexible there. So I'll go ahead and submit. Collect those points. I got my new shiny 3 Caillou rating. And yeah, look through the answers. Learn from everybody. The more learning, the better. And yeah, there's some... Okay, there's some reading here. Yeah, you know what to do. Hit me up if you have questions, comments. I like to see your solutions too. Otherwise, I'll see you in another video. Thanks for watching.